This work actually is, I grew up in Aberystwyth and I've spent most of my youth on the beach at Borth, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the submerged forest at Borth that some of you probably know about. And I've been working on some of these things for 10, 15 years or more probably now. So this is a sort of culmination of quite a bit of work, but most recently funded by the Portalis project, which finished last September and allowed me to do some things in the field that I'd been wanting to do for a long time, and I was just biding my time until the money came up. So I'm mainly talking about the Mesolithic. The Mesolithic in Ceredigion is rather poorly understood, certainly in comparison to the Mesolithic in Pembrokeshire, where there's a lot of sites. In Ceredigion, we don't have very many sites. This is a distribution of finds spots in Ceredigion, and most of the finds that we have and the places we've got material from are quite small assemblages. The only large assemblage we've got is from here in Aberystwyth, and we've seen Pendinas this morning, and there's a very important Mesolithic site underneath the foot of Pendinas, which I'll say a little bit about. So our distribution of Mesolithic sites from the HCR is as shown here, with a sort of coastal distribution and then a distribution of single find artefacts up the Tavy Valley. And that's really what we were working towards from. So where is our earliest site in Ceredigion? Well, this is the site of Tanabulch. We've seen Pendinas up here. This is the northern part of the hill fort. The site at Tanabulch, the Mesolithic site at Tanabulch, is here. This is an old railway quarry on a branch of the Manchester and Milford Railway into Aberystwyth. And the site of the isolation hospital here, this whole area from there through to the pillbox that just sat on top of there was identified as a Mesolithic site very early in the 20th century. There was a couple of publications early on. Thomas and Dudlake in 1925 published this map. We were talking about maps earlier. We don't really know where their trenches and test pits were, but one of the things that they did, thankfully, was sieve everything that they excavated. This is 1910s, and they're sieving all the sediment that came off that site, so they're finding the smallest microlithic artefacts, which is very unusual for that time. So in some senses they were ahead of the game, but we don't really have a lot of information on where these artefacts came from. This is my interpretation of what they saw with the topsoil, colluvium, that's hill wash, a black area that was probably a burnt horizon, and then the artefact horizon underneath it. And today, when you walk up to the pillbox, you can still find the odd flint artefact occurring at in the present day. And these are the sort of artefacts we're talking about, little microlithic things here. The assemblage, and it runs to thousands of pieces. This is a big assemblage. And Graham Clark, when he was writing his book on the Mesolithic in the 1930s, considered making Aberystwyth type site for the Mesolithic at that particular time. So it shows you how important it was. But it's largely been forgotten. But it's both early and late Mesolithic material on the site. The collections are split between the National Museum in Cardiff and Ceredigion Museum in Aberystwyth. But unfortunately, many of the artefacts that are illustrated in the publications have gone missing. They're in neither location. This was a University of Wales Aberystwyth excavation. My guess is that some of these artefacts were in the teaching collections, which I know got split up, and a number of people ended up with the teaching collections, and some of them probably got thrown out. So unfortunately, the sort of type pieces are long since gone. Okay, so one of the things that we did last summer as part of the Portalis project was to investigate the offshore area. This is our boat here, that we brought down into Cardigan Bay, and what we were trying to do was look beneath the surface of the seabed, not map the seabed itself, but look underneath the surface of the seabed to look at the structure, to look at the old river valleys that existed in Cardigan Bay before sea level change flooded Cardigan Bay. So the landscapes that are contemporary with the site at Aberystwyth. There's the track of some of our survey lines. So here this is the Dovey, Aberystwyth is here, and Newquay is down here. There are one or two of you in the audience who probably know what you're looking at here, but the rest of you, this is looking weird stuff. What this is a seismic profile through the seabed. This is the seabed, that's the sea surface. And you can see these patterns, that's all you need to know. These are buried river channels underneath the seabed, underneath the modern seabed. You can see a very nice one down here. And so we've been trying to map those to try and see where the River Ystwyth and the River Aeron were going out into the Cardigan Bay, because those are the river valleys that the people at Aberystwyth, at Tanabwch, would have been using. So here we've reconstructed the geography of Cardigan Bay from 11,000 years ago, the beginning of the Holocene, the warm period we're in, through to 6,000 years ago. And importantly, here's our Mesolithic site in Aberystwyth. And it's at the head of the Ystwyth and the Aeron that runs down there. If any of you fish in this area, the fishermen call that feature today the trawling ground or the gutter. And that's the old river valley. And we know there's peat in there, there's a borehole, and we know that it flooded around about 9,500 years ago. So what that allows us to do is to think about the landscape associated with this site at Tanabwch, and in the early Mesolithic, maybe about 9,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, it would have been at the head of a tidal estuary running up through here. By the later Mesolithic, when those final Mesolithic people were at the site there, the coastline would have been where it is at the present day. So we're beginning to be able to think through what these landscapes that these people lived in, and that's an attempt at reconstructing what standing in the approximate position of the Ceredigion Museum looking north to Constitution Hill would have looked like around about that time. And I forget the author's name for this, so apologies. So that's investigating an old site. We've also been working at Talsarn in the Aeron Valley. You're looking down the Aeron Valley towards Ystrad Aeron, and a few miles further south, you get to Aberaeron there. And we've been excavating here, and you can see our trenches in the landscape here. This is work with the students at Lampeter doing archaeology. This is the site of an old glacial lake. If you were here at this location 15,000 years ago, this would have been a large lake. It's very flat. Any of you know this area? It floods very frequently and under heavy rain at the present time, which we've got plenty of course. So this is an old glacial lake. It infilled to approximately the modern levels, maybe around about the beginning of the Holocene, about 11,000 years ago. But you can see these slight discolorations, these two, they're not quite circular features here, but these were islands in this infilling lake at the beginning of the Holocene, and probably through to maybe the Neolithic, maybe even on beyond into the Bronze Age. And these islands form dry spaces in what would be otherwise a wet area. The edge of the lake is around about here somewhere, and it's coming around in this direction. It's about 200 metres off the bottom end there. So there's our excavation, each one of those trenches. Out here, this is wetland adjacent to these islands, and this wetland contains peat, and the sequences go back to the beginning of the Holocene, nearly 12,000 years ago out there, and we've got pollen records that cover this time period. So we've got an environmental record as well as an evidence of humans on mounds, calling them there, but they're islands really. And here's the mapped edge of the lake down through here. There's our excavation trench, the year before last. It's fair to say that we don't have a huge amount of archaeology on this particular site. One of the first artefacts we found is down here. It's basically at the bottom of the plough soil. It's a partly polished stone axe, typical sort of Neolithic axe. It was found adjacent to these patches of burnt material, and those patches of burnt material are giving a Middle Neolithic date. So it seems like we've got people on this dry island in the Middle Neolithic. The second island, here's our trench that's produced the archaeology. This trench, that's ploughing from probably the Second World War use of this area for growing vegetables. It's a distribution of our finds there. We've got burnt material there, which is dating to the early Neolithic. But we also have a microlith from that assemblage. It's one of the few artifacts, tools that we do have, which would typically be Mesolithic, but you can get microliths in early Neolithic assemblages. So at the moment, we think that these islands are occupied by people on a very temporary basis. There's no evidence for people living there. They're probably going to these islands. Maybe they're waterfowling, maybe they're fishing, things like that. But they're certainly there in this lake, in the Neolithic, possibly in the Mesolithic. We're not sure. To say we wanted to do some drilling to get cores for environmental records. Here's the sequence. We've got peats at the top, peats at the bottom, dates going back to the very early Holocene at the bottom there. Radiocarbon pollen diagrams we've got for the area now. Interestingly, our pollen record goes from the early Holocene down here, you can't read this, right the way through into the very late Roman, earliest medieval period in there. So we're hopeful that Tidder Davis, who's done this work, is quite happy. We've got really quite a long record for lowland Ceredigion, which we don't really have elsewhere because most of our records are from the uplands like Tregarron Bog. The other thing to point out on this particular pollen diagram, we're just looking at the bottom part of the pollen diagram here, is this here. This is the abundance of charcoal back in the early Holocene. This is 10 to 11,000, nearly 12,000 years ago. And those charcoal concentrations are as high as you get higher up in the sequences in the Iron Age. There's always a problem with interpreting charcoal from pollen diagrams. Is this natural forest fires, or is this human activity creating open conditions? And certainly there's quite a few open landscape plants in here, which this might be evidence for the earliest humans in Ceredigion. We don't have the archaeology, but Tidder's reasonably happy with that interpretation. So let's wait and see. Elsewhere on the edge of the lake, this is a transect through the edge of the lake, and the deposits there are much more recent. These are dates of 600-700 AD. This isn't what I expected at all when I went there. I was looking for the places the Mesolithic people were actually living. We've got a very large piece of timber here that dates to the early Roman period. So it's quite possible we've got a late Iron Age, early Roman area of activity. I think this is in a very large pit. So, there's something more substantial going on there. I'm going to fly through this because I know that my time is running out. I'm just going to tell you very briefly about some of the other sites that we've been working on, starting in Aberaeron and working north. There's a submerged forest, a little bit of one anyway, in Aberaeron, just to the north of the harbour. There's a piece of timber there. There's Nigel Nailing taking a dendrochronology sample on it. That forest is Bronze Age in date. So it's a little bit younger than the submerged forest at Borth. I'm going to skip past that. Moving north to Llanrusted, there's a submerged forest at Llanrusted that periodically gets into the news. This is a trench cut through it. It's organic sediments with the occasional peat. There's this structure, this stone structure that Stephen Briggs noticed a few years ago. It's a trackway that's pushed down into the top of the peat. We know that peat now. There's the dates running from the Bronze Age. We've actually got Neolithic dates a little bit lower, right the way through to the early medieval period, just below that stone trackway. So that's also given us a pollen diagram for this area. One of the the thing that really interests me here is that little spike there. That's a fungal spore from fungus that only live on cattle dung, and that's back in the Bronze Age. So that might be evidence for cattle in Llanrusted in the Bronze Age. Rapidly moving north, Tanabol. We heard about the excavations on Pendinas. We've been working in the valley bottom down here. We drilled 3 holes down there. I won't say anything about that. There's our drill. Quite a nice bit of kit to play with that. That's the sort of sequences that we've got. Interestingly, what this tells us, and we've got a pollen diagram from here, but unfortunately for the Iron Age people in the audience, or the people who like the Iron Age rather, the pollen record is only good from the late Mesolithic here at the bottom through to the sometime in the Neolithic. But it looks to me like the estuary of the Ystwyth was always a salt marsh. It was never open, and this goes right the way through to the medieval period. It's not like an open estuary. It's a salt marsh dominated estuary with a big barrier, like a big beach across it. So just think about that when you think about the location of Tanabol and its environmental setting and context, and how you get boats in and things like that. Right, finally, because I think I've got about 5 minutes left, I'm just going to say something about Borth. Borth's special to me. I spent all my tiny little years on this beach. And to me, the submerged forest at Borth is the best in Britain. It's absolutely fantastic. And when you see it, if you get a chance to go and see it after a big storm, please do go and see it. That's it looking north. I've worked on lots of submerged forests around the country, and none of them come anywhere close to this. It's been recognised since at least the time of Edward Llwyd. He wrote about it in 16, whenever he was writing. It's been well known since then. We've been able to drill a very deep core through the sequences up here at Ynys. So what I was trying to get here was when the Dyfi first flooded. When did it become full of marine waters? And we've got dates of 11,700 early Holocene down there. So almost as soon as it got warm, there were seawaters in the Dyfi. Because I'm going to just flicker around those because I haven't got much time. Archaeological evidence until recently has been rather poor in the forest. But over the last few years, we've been starting to find some evidence up here near the near Ynys. And here is a scatter of burnt stone sat on top of a burnt older log that's lying in the peat. It's evidence for people coming and doing something. There's no cultural material with it, but they're burning those stones. And that patch is here. So you can see it's in the peat. This peat is supposedly starts forming around about 6,000 years ago in the Mesolithic and ceases to form about 4,000 years ago. Here, there are lots of patches of burnt stones all around here. So people are repeatedly coming to this location. We've got some, that's down here. It's actually quite complicated what's going on up here. It's not like the forest further south. There's all sorts of strange things going on here. And I've been trying to map out the tidal channels that are in this particular area because they're each giving different ages of deposits. So around here where we had that scatter, here's some more scatters. There's a circular feature there, which may be the top of a hearth just appearing, and then more widely distributed material. We've got a little bit of pollen data. And this peat where we got these burnt stones in is running from about nearly 4,000 years ago, so Bronze Age, back to at least the Middle Neolithic. And we don't know at the moment how far we go back, but we might have Mesolithic dates towards the bottom. So people are repeatedly coming to this point, and it confused me for a long time why they were there and nowhere else. Just to the north, we're getting lots of red deer bones. That was some I'd collected the other day. And what we seem to have, all our scatters are down here. Red deer bones and sequences, estuarine sequences from the estuary of the Dovey up here, dating to the Neolithic. And I think what we've got here preserved is the edge of the estuary from the Mesolithic through the Neolithic and into the Bronze Age. That's why all these stone scatters here. People are coming to the edge of the estuary and doing things. Don't know what, because there's no cultural material in there other than the burnt stones, but they're coming here repeatedly. This edge of the estuary is then cut by this channel complex, and we've got Iron Age material in that. We've got bones, cattle bones that are dated to the Iron Age. So it's a really complicated little bit of landscape here. It's within the triple SI, and it needs to be monitored. At the moment, it's not being monitored particularly well, but I think finally we've got to an understanding of what's actually going on there. So I'm going to leave it there because I've probably run out of my time. But that gives you a little flavour of the sorts of things we've been doing, and hopefully, this Borth work has got to go on. This, it's a long-term monitoring exercise there to see what's actually going on there. But hopefully, we'll be publishing some of this stuff in the near future. Thank you very much.